Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. So, I've been asked to talk about embracing change and moving the needle. And I was having a look at a lot of TED talks preparing to do this presentation. And there are so many talks about the impact of technology on education and higher education that really I could just do a TED talk on TED Talks. There are so many examples, of course, of the impact of technology on higher education. And I've just got time to give a few examples. We have university geology students now taking field classes virtually from the planet Mars. We have a revolution in clinical training for medical students linking up from all over the world and using sophisticated technology to improve diagnosis and support for patients in medical wards. Another revolution in support for students with disabilities. And for physical education students, could you believe that physical education could be learned online? It certainly can. It's happening at the famous Tsinghua University in China, for example. And teachers are linking up through electronic devices to see whether their students are picking up the right techniques and developing fitness. And for years there have been online tutoring systems, and this is an example of a language app that will pick up one-to-one whether you are learning vocabulary efficiently and will adapt teaching to your particular needs. Harvard University had a headline recently saying that it's going to be using an artificial intelligence professor to teach its students in the next semester. And the potential for this personalized online tutoring is really considerable. And it's just going to go further and further. We will find in the end that online tutoring devices are linking directly to our brains. We really are in for a massive change in society when that happens. As a registrar, I'm very much interested in the potential of technology to transform administration, and particularly data and analytics that allow us to monitor the progress of our students and even to make good predictions about which students are likely to be at risk of failing or underperforming, so we can intervene early in their interests. And technology has done so much to increase access to higher education. This has been going on for years, actually. Distance learning options of various kinds, all sorts of facilities to help people who can't go physically to university. And now we have a lot of talk in higher education about ChatGPT. It's made the whole sector very nervous. And there are lots of ethical issues about ChatGPT. I did think of asking ChatGPT to do my presentation this afternoon, but I didn't actually do that. But our sector is going to have to help students to benefit from ChatGPT. We're actually going to have to use it to help our students develop their critical thinking skills and their creativity. So, could technology take over teaching altogether? Bill Gates is quoted saying that artificial intelligence chatbots will teach children to read within 18 months. You'll be stunned by how it helps, he says. And the entrepreneur Sal Khan says artificial intelligence can spark the greatest positive transformation that education has ever seen. Well, all of this technology, it certainly does challenge us in universities. It's exposing variability in the quality of teaching. Why come to us if you could just learn on your own? Some people are asking that question, so we must be careful. No industry can be complacent, even one that's been here for hundreds of years, or thousands of years actually, as in the case of higher education. And there have been for a long time lots of debates about the value of higher education across the world. Are too many students going to university? I would say probably not actually, but that's another subject. Are students studying the right subjects? Interestingly, what impact do universities really have on the thinking skills and the attitudes of their students when they're at university? How much do students really change? These are all challenges for us. But let's pause for thought. This picture is of a guy who is not enjoying technology very much. If it would play, you would see he's actually smashing up his computer. And in fact, I looked on the internet and found endless numbers of pictures of people taking hammers to their computers. So it was quite a comic reminder, actually, of some of the limitations and frustrations of working with technology. And we learned a lot from COVID-19 also about the practical impact of technology. For a start, right across Bangladesh, for example, so many students who can't come to the party, so to speak, because they don't have access in the first place, or they're relying on studying on mobile phones. And then we also had so many problems of students becoming lonely, mental health issues, developing poor study habits. And it was a great relief, certainly on our campus, for all of us to come back together again physically. And I think many of us have relished the experience of actually being together again, just as we are here this afternoon together, all as a group, not online, but together. So something else I noticed going through all these TED talks over the last couple of weeks is that there are lots of talks that start challenging the role of technology and taking a more critical view of it. This is Mary Jo Madder, a technologist and teacher herself, who did a talk saying why technology can't fix education. And there are many others like that. And what she introduced was a concept of a kind of creative triangle. You can see it here, of a human teacher, a student actively engaged, supported by technology. So you can't just throw technology at education, you really have to work at it. And for you as young students, we really are in exciting times because across the world, we are beginning to understand so much about the psychology of learning, how to develop really active learning, really interactive learning, different approaches to teaching and learning. It does mean big changes in conservative countries in particular because students become partners, of course. Learning inside the classroom, outside the classroom, learning by doing, learning by enjoyment, learning through computer games, through simulations, through working on so-called real-world problems. So many styles, and it needs everybody to be really engaged. Now that's the challenge for universities. We have to think about how to use some elements of online learning, some elements of physical teaching, and what is known as blended learning. And you really have to think about what is working and what isn't, and changing it. Now, we also hear a lot of talk about the fourth industrial revolution and even the fifth industrial revolution. And I'm thinking very much of you students in this room. It seems quite bewildering, all these huge technological changes that are taking place. And it is amazing that human beings are now able to transform the world, to redesign the world that we live in by manipulating the atoms and the chemicals in which the world is based. Extraordinary thing to be happening. And yet, once again, a moment of balance. Let's calm down for a moment, in a sense, because we think about the skills and attitudes that are going to be needed for the future. Well, there are many changes, of course. We have to prepare our students to have the skills to interact with very sophisticated technology. You need to be able to work naturally with people all over the world. And you have to prepare for a world where we don't know what some of the jobs are likely to be, with jobs disappearing and other industries beginning to develop. But really, as I look at the list of skills that you may need, they're very similar to what they were like in the time when I was a student, and actually even in the 1940s, would you believe, in the UK, they were talking about these things then. Because, of course, these things are needed at any time of the human race. Being able to think effectively, being able to solve problems, being able to work in teams, to work on projects, leadership, entrepreneurship. Everyone needs an entrepreneurial mindset nowadays, not just the people who are going to set up businesses. And so it goes on. So there's some stability actually to what we have to do in education with previous generations. And this brings me towards the closing part of my talk. It's a reflection really on what higher education is for. Because it seems to me that with the huge changes taking place in technology, a mistake is quite often made of people who think just throw technology at it, or higher education is really only for one thing. It's a consumerist thing about getting a job in the short term. Getting a job in the short term is vitally important for all of us, many of you in this room, but there's so much more to it. And higher education institutions actually, they are for so many things: teaching, learning, thinking at various levels, scholarship, innovation, creativity, international connection, knowledge exchange, working with industry. I could go on for quite a while. There's a whole talk on this in itself. Now, there is an ancient and heart-touching story from thousands of years ago about the night when God appears to King Solomon in a dream. And God says to Solomon, ask for anything you want, and I will give it to you. Can you imagine that? God says to you, have anything you want, just tell me, and I will give it to you. And what does King Solomon ask for? He asks for wisdom. And God replies, Solomon, I'm pleased with you, because you could have asked for wealth. You could even have asked for the death of your enemies, but you asked for wisdom. And because of that, I'm going to give you the whole lot. You can have wisdom, wealth, everything. A very famous story. Now, in a way, that's what higher education is for, actually. It's about a search for wisdom and knowledge at every level that can also lead to prosperity. And we always must remember this as we go through such bewildering technological changes. And here's, by the way, another thought. This is just from my home area in London. Another thing, bringing this up to modern times, that higher education institutions have a well-evidenced role doing. This is Trinity Dowland. I declare an interest. I worked here. It's a major performing arts institution. Look at the bottom building there. That's called the Dowland building. It was designed by the same people who designed the Olympic Stadium in Beijing. And it's one of the most famous contemporary dance training centres in Europe. But it was built in a rubbish dump. And years later, that rubbish dump is now a centre of a thriving area. And people have gone to study, how was it that something that was a rubbish dump turned into a thriving part of South London? And there are loads of examples of universities that have that impact on the regeneration of their areas. So the power, the richness, even the magic of higher education, we can reflect on that. So a final thought. This word disruption is at the centre of this afternoon's discussions. Higher education in Bangladesh certainly needs disruption. There are some wonderful achievements in education here, but it really does need some reform. And there's a lot of discussion about the need of reform that there is, the need to improve the quality of teaching and learning, to improve graduate employment, actually. It takes far too long for us in universities to introduce new curriculum, well below the timescales that we need to pick up with the world needs. So lots of things that need changing. Is there a recipe to create really excellent universities? I think there almost is, actually. And the government of Bangladesh has picked up many of the ingredients in the national strategy for higher education. But we have to do some of these things. And I think that there are several priorities. Now, I could mention at least a dozen of these, but I've got to limit myself. So one of them is that we have to develop a much stronger research base in the universities. Another one is we've got to work together closely with schools, colleges, and industry, all of us working together very closely to raise quality and give students much better opportunities for the future. And the last thing I think I would just like to mention is that coming from the UK, I notice in Bangladesh that universities don't tend to collaborate, actually. They're very competitive. They don't talk to each other very much. The UK has a higher education sector which is fiercely competitive, but there's quite a lot of collaboration. So there's one thing that we can do. We need as good universities to collaborate to develop a really good workforce of highly trained and developed teachers and administrators for a future, something we could easily work together on for the next 2 to 3 years. So that's the thought that I would like to offer you this afternoon. Thank you so very much, and that's the end of my talk. Thank you. Thank you.